Happy Red Friday. Let's get it going here on KCMO 95.7 FM. We are streaming all morning long at KCMOTalkRadio.com. Welcome in. I don't know about you, but I am feeling better at the end of this week about Donald Trump's chances of winning the election than I have at any point since Kamala Harris got into this race. You look at the last couple of months and, it took Trump some time to kind of find his footing when Kamala got swapped in for Joe. He thought he was rolling to a landslide. He had nearly been killed. Biden was bombing out on debates, and then Biden drops out. And since then, the media did its best job trying to uplift Kamala Harris, trying to, of course, make her a palatable candidate to the American people. And Trump was kind of flailing at times over the last couple of months. He clearly thought he had this thing in the bag with Joe Biden. And then she comes in, and the media is just waxing poetic about Kamala Harris. And it clearly bothered him. And his team needed to pivot. And they struggled in that pivot, admittedly. The DNC then took place. That was obviously a lot of pomp and circumstance. And then you got to the month of September when really things started to pick up. You had a debate, and you had Trump at times on his heels. But over the last week, Donald Trump has had his best week since the middle of July. Now, does that mean he's going to be in a position next week? I'm going to feel this way a week from today. It's entirely possible I could feel the complete opposite 1 week from today, because that's how it goes with Trump, right? One day, one comment, one quote completely changes the equation. One social media post, and you're like, facepalm emoji. Damn it. What do we do now?
Aren't there some board games where if you roll doubles or something, you have to go back to start? It feels like that sometimes.
It does. It's like Candyland. I've been playing that with the girls. I'm right at the finish line. Then I draw the popsicle. I got to go halfway back.
There you go.
So that's entirely possible, John. And we're getting further away from some of the nonsense. Donald Trump has been much more on point than, let's say, he was 2 weeks ago.
They're eating the dogs. The people that came in, they're eating the cats.
Yeah, so that's a distant memory. We're getting away from the dogs and the cats and the pets. And although I am looking at pets right now being rescued in Atlanta after that hurricane's blowing through. But we're getting away from the eating of the dogs and the cats, and we're getting back to the issues that the American people care about. And that is the economy, and that is the border. And the other reason I feel better is not just that Donald Trump's been more focused here over the last several days. It's also that Kamala Harris feels like she's on her heels. It's the old adage in politics where if you are explaining yourself, you are losing. And Kamala Harris has been the one who has had to explain herself over the last few days. She has spent more time trying to close the gap with Donald Trump on the two major issues. One being the economy, and two being the immigration issue. She had this big speech earlier this week. We talked about a lot yesterday in Pittsburgh, where she tried to basically put together some kind of economic proposal that was different, that was obviously not Donald Trump's proposal, that was going to be acceptable to the American people. Now, I don't think anything really came out of that speech. It was 40 minutes. I watched the whole thing, and it was a lot of Trump's bad, and I grew up in a middle-class house.
Millions of Americans are sitting around their own kitchen tables with making ends meet. I grew up in a middle-class family. I understand the pressures of making ends meet.
There was nothing of substance until about 15, 20 minutes in, and the substance was pretty light. But once again, she was on the explaining side of things. And then today, she goes down to the border. And that's a dicey move, because that can do one of two things. Yes, she can try to highlight the fact that she's now amazingly, for some reason, tough on the border issue, which I guess if your memory doesn't go back more than 15 minutes, you might believe. But it also could backfire in the sense that it could bring to light the failures on the border from the last 3.5 years, where she was obviously in charge, was dubbed the border czar.
Of course, she's pushing that she will sign that dopey bill that didn't pass earlier on the border, right?
I know. That's going to be the big
Suggesting that
pitch.
She's all for it.
Yeah, suddenly she's a border czar, hawk. Suddenly, we got to stop. It's like, wait, under your watch, we've had 15 million people, estimates, cross the border illegally. Now suddenly we've got, like, the border hawk here in Kamala Harris. Yeah, they call me Hawk on the side, by the way. Come on. Who's buying that? So are you sitting here today on a Friday morning? It's a red Friday. It's a beautiful day. It's going to be a beautiful day in Kansas City. And are you feeling better than you have at any point since July? Because I am. I got a little pep in my step. I'm feeling good. Chiefs are hopefully going to be 4-0 by the end of the weekend. And I am feeling like Donald Trump is in a place today where he is, I don't want to say cruising to a victory, but he is in a place that he has not been in a long time. And that's getting that mojo back and feeling like he is in a position to get himself back into the White House on behalf of the American people. 913-408-7957. That's our text line. That's our studio line here on KCMO. And the reason I want to get your pulse on this is because I don't know if I'm a man on an island. There's some new polling that came out yesterday. Bloomberg had a poll that came out that showed Donald Trump trailing nationally and trailing in some of the key swing states. And I will get to that coming up this morning here on KCMO. I'm never going to just give you the polls that you want to hear. I'll give you all the polls because I think that's what matters. And this new Bloomberg Morning Consult poll had Harris up 7 in Nevada, 5 in Pennsylvania, 3 in Wisconsin, 3 in Michigan, 3 in Arizona, up 2 in North Carolina, and tied in Georgia. That is a very good poll, of course, for Kamala Harris. But while normally I might say, well, could that be problematic? It just, my gut feeling right now is not where that poll is. And of course we know that you can get a poll to tell you whatever you want. I look at it like this. Kamala Harris has done more media this week than she's done combined in a very long time. If she's up in all of the swing states, she's not just magically doing this media. There's no point if she's up like that in all of these swing states because even her people know she's not great at it. So why would they trot her out there if they see polling internally that also shows her up 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 points in some of these swing states? I don't see it. Matt's in Kearney. What's up, Matt? You're first up. Good morning, my man.
Hey, good morning. How you doing, Pete?
I'm doing well, brother.
I hear how Kamala or Kabbalah or however you say her name is goes ahead and explains how she grew up in a middle-class family and knows the struggles that we've had. I grew up in a middle-class family. We didn't have struggles. The struggles in the middle-class family is just now, happening right now. Appreciate your
That
response.
is an excellent point there, Matt. I'm glad you brought that up. The middle-class family was always the backbone, the strength of the American economy. And what inflation does is it hollows out the middle class. What very progressive economic policies do is they create an elitist class and they create a class of people who are reliant on the government. And the middle of the pack, the middle class, gets hollowed out, gets shrunk, and ultimately get screwed because they can't work their way into the elite class and they have just enough money where they can't, and by the way, don't want to be on government programs. That is an absolutely outstanding point. Well done there, Matt. That's sharp on a Friday morning. 913-408-7957. Let's squeeze in John and Gardner real fast. What's up, John? You're on KCMO.
Hey, Pete, good morning. I'm really gratified to hear you talking more optimistically and that pet back in your step because you were just dogging on Trump for so bad there for a few weeks.
Talk to me in a week, though. I might feel different. Talk to me in a week, John. But you're right. I'm feeling very good today, brother.
And Dan Bongino's pointing this out. I think Kamala's internal polls aren't great. She's starting to act and do quirky things like she is reversing course. Appearing at the border to me seemed like when they announced that, I said, man, this is really desperate. Mm-hmm. And she's losing the Latino vote. I don't think a lot of black men just don't like her. I just don't think she's that likable and starting to catch up with her, and she's starting to act a little off. I don't know.
Yeah, we'll see, John. Thank you, my man. Have a great weekend. Appreciate it. Listen, we've seen some of the polling suggesting that she is certainly not where Hillary Clinton was 8 years ago, or even Joe Biden 4 years ago with Latino voters. And, Donald Trump did think he'd do well with black men 40 years ago. He didn't. So a lot of that right now is somewhat anecdotal. But the reality is, and I hate to put people in those buckets like that, but the reality is right now you look at this situation and you say to yourself, if he's closing gaps with some of these subgroups that traditionally Republicans have struggled with, that is a good sign for Donald Trump ahead of November 5. Coming up next on KCMO, it is a Red Friday here across Kansas City. And there is a common narrative around Travis Kelce that I am not buying. I wonder if you are. We'll get to it next. Well, we're getting ready for the Chargers this weekend. Everyone's got their red on here on the show. It's part of a requirement on a Friday morning to work at KCMO. Ray will have his red tight tank top on as well when he gets his show started later this morning. Right, Mark? You guys always make sure he's got his tight tank top on, don't you?
Oh, yeah. He's got to wear his Chiefs red tank. Make sure the sun's out, guns out.
Exactly.
One of those fishnet mesh ones.
As long as it's red.
Whatever. As long as it's red, as Mark said. I don't want to see what underwear he's wearing. I don't need that kind of information. But yes. And Travis Kelce, he's starting to get dogged a little bit. He's 3 games in. He's got 8 total catches. Hasn't cracked 100 yards on the season. And you saw the memes from Sunday night where he's sitting there and he's looking all doom and gloom and hapless on the sidelines. And the mustache has to go, by the way. But I'm not one of these people that's looking at Travis Kelce and being like, he's washed up. The only way I think you believe that is if you want to find a reason to blame Travis Kelce's now worldwide fame and Taylor Swift for something that has nothing to do with what we're actually watching on the football field. I mean, I'm looking at a guy who has been open quite a few times, and frankly, his quarterback hasn't found him when he's been open quite a few times. Now, listen, there's no beef, I'm sure. It's just Mahomes is off to a bit of a slow start, right? And he's not maybe seeing the field as well. And also, Travis Kelce's getting double-teamed. You look at that touchdown towards the end of the game on Sunday night to Juju. Kelce was open. I rewatched that play a couple of times. Kelce's open,
right,
but Juju's more open.
Yeah.
So what do?
Yeah.
You throw the ball to the guy who's more open, who then goes on to score a touchdown.
Yeah. Well, when I rode the bench in high school, we were taught, if you can touch it, you can catch it. And I saw him drop one, so he's got a drop in there, too.
He does have a drop in there. You're right. But I don't sit here getting ready for this game on Sunday and say, they're moving on from Kelce. He's washed up.
No.
Oh, man. And by the way, I actually don't think this is the worst thing. The fact that they're 3-0 while Travis Kelce has 8 catches on the season and 69 total yards is and 0 touchdowns is awesome. Because Travis Kelce's at that point in his career, I was going to say getting to that point in his career, but no, he's at that point in his career where you'd rather have this guy at 34, soon to be 35 years old here next week, next Saturday. He turns 35 years old. Feeling great going into January. It's kind of like how NBA players now nurse it along, especially the veterans. They call it load management, which means something different to me than it does to
quitting.
NBA players, yes.
Yeah.
They load manage to get ready for the playoffs. We just need we know this team is going to be in the postseason. Now, whether or not they're the number 1 seed or whatever, don't know. But this team is going to be the 1 seed. Or is going to be in the playoffs. So as long as Travis Kelce is set for that, as long as he's healthy for January, just nurse him through this 17-game regular season. He's going to be 35. Now, I'm a year older, but 35 in the NFL is ancient, okay? You are an old man in the NFL at 35, John.
Yep, absolutely. Well, I think this all stems from, as you were starting to point out here, that people like to play like that Kevin Bacon game. Is it, 7 steps? Can we get this 7 steps from Taylor Swift?
Yes.
Travis has been partying. He went to the shows. He's
7 degrees of separation.
Yeah. There you go.
That's what they want to do. 6 degrees, actually, it is.
Is it 6?
So that's what they want to do here. They want to make it look like Travis Kelce is over the hill, and we can blame him flying on a private jet with Taylor Swift. It's like, no, we can't do that. He's 35 years old playing in the NFL. He's going to slow down. And if you actually watch these games, you can't come to the conclusion that Travis Kelce is washed up unless you want to come to that conclusion, which is always possible.
He participated in all the training camp, right?
Yes.
He takes trainers with him when he goes places. He's got 3 guys, I think, that work with him at different times.
Yeah, and that was highlighted actually in a piece in the New York Times this week about how even when he was traveling over the offseason, he had these trainers with him. It's not like the guy was getting drunk, eating McDonald's late at night, and being a total slob. That's not what he was doing. And Jason and Travis talked about this on the podcast this week, and you can hear Jason Kelce get a little choked up. I mean, whatever you think about these guys, whatever you think about the relationship with Taylor Swift, we should all aspire to have the relationship with our siblings, and we should all aspire to have our children have this relationship as siblings that these two guys have. Take a listen to Jason getting choked up while he's talking about what some of the haters are saying about Travis's slow start to the season.
It's going to go your way, especially if you freaking keep being the guy you've always been. You know what I mean? There ain't nobody that I've ever played sports with and nobody that anybody's ever been on a team with that has loved being out there with Trav more. And I know it's frustrating for me to watch and have to listen to, but I can't wait. And we don't got to put that in there, but I just can't wait. I can't wait for it to turn.
And if it doesn't, as long as we're winning football games, we good to go, baby.
It's classic, right? Older brother's getting choked up. I can't wait for this thing to turn. And then the goofy younger brother, who's actually the one impacted by all this, is like, as long as we're winning, baby, it's cool. It's all good.
And this weekend is actually a perfect time for him to turn it around because he's playing the Chargers, who he's dominated over 100 yards, 3 touchdowns 2 years ago, 1 touchdown in his game against him last year. Derwin James sitting this week because he's suspended. That's the guy that usually covers Travis Kelce.
Ooh.
So it's the perfect breakout week for him.
I think this is where your parlay may be going, Mark.
Never know.
All right. We'll find out about the Mark Van Sickle Chiefs parlay in the buy, sell, hold segment, which comes up at 8:45 this morning. So something tells me Mark may be going back to the well with Travis Kelce in that parlay, which he will give us in a couple of hours. Happy Red Friday. Thanks for being here on KCMO Talk Radio. We've got a busy day. Kendall Gammon will be here next hour. Steve Moore, former economist under Donald Trump, at 7:30. And Nick Haynes, Kansas City PBS. And our in-studio feature Friday guest is Brian Haney, the voice of the Kansas Jayhawks. Coming up next, carjackings, where and who? We'll get to it next. We've got the carjacking twins, I guess we could call them, down in Belton. Alleged armed carjacking followed an intentional crash on I-49 in Belton earlier in the week. And this story popped yesterday, and it led to charges against twin sisters from Kansas City, Missouri. And by the way, one of these sisters in the mugshot is rocking a Mahomes jersey. It is quite a look. It's like, yeah, you wore your Sunday best to go do an armed carjacking and didn't really work out too well for you now, did it?
And they're twins. You'd be like,
yeah.
What?
So let me give you the story here from Fox 4, and then we'll get to more of this here on 95.7 FM KCMO.
She didn't do anything wrong. She got off the highway. It was a relatively busy area. This still happened. When confronted, she gave the vehicle up. Very smart. No vehicle's worth dying for.
Lieutenant Dan Davis with Belton PD says a crime like this is uncommon for the area.
Luckily, at least 2 people are going to be held accountable for that.
The victim told police she was driving her blue Dodge Charger and was rear-ended by a black Kia on southbound I-49 near exit 175. When she pulled off the road, she made contact with the driver, who has since been identified as Rodney Gorham. Her twin sister, Rodnisha, also got out of the car with an unknown male. Police say Rodnisha then got into the victim's car. The unknown male then pulled out a gun and pointed it at the victim. Court documents show Rodnisha and the male then drove away in the Charger while her sister drove the Kia. The Kia we now know to be stolen from another jurisdiction. The victim was unharmed. She even snapped this photo.
The vehicle was equipped with a system that allowed us to be able to track the general location of the vehicle. Kansas City was able to locate it, gave chase, lost it for some time, but then picked it back up with their aviation unit, and the helicopter was able to follow it to an area when the suspects bailed out.
That area was here near 36th Street and Brooklyn Avenue, where the twins were arrested.
Charges were filed with the Cass County Prosecutor's Office today.
And thank goodness, of course, Belton being in Cass County, the alleged armed carjackers were just a little too far across the county line. Stay in Jackson, and you got a chance. All right? Gene Peters Baker will slap you on the wrist. Cass County, it's a different ball game. So hopefully this will be a swift return of justice. It'll take a little time. But if there's anything we learn from the Sean Brady situation down in Brookside or this story off I-49 in Belton, and I know this has happened, obviously, where criminals will purposely rear-end someone and then carjack you. It's not the first time this has happened. It won't be the last. But if there's something to learn from what's happened in this town and some notable stories over the last couple of weeks, it's the car is not worth your life. It's not. And I don't know if anybody has had experiences like this at 913-408-7957, but now that we've got 2 prominent cases, one much more prominent, by the way, of course, a couple of weeks ago in Brookside, but the car is never worth your life. And obviously, Sean Brady, rest in peace, would do it differently if he could do it all over again. But it's just human nature. In his case, he was not in his vehicle. He saw these 2 guys, these 2 teenagers, breaking into his car outside of his restaurant, and he tried to intrude. And he ended up losing his life. But it's also why now you also have retail stores who say, if you see somebody stealing something, guess what? You got to let them go. We all mock it, but at the same time, these companies are looking out for their employees, as they should. A sweatshirt or a pair of jeans is not worth you losing your life over. The only way this stuff changes is if you start to get serious again on prosecuting crime in major American cities. And for too many, including Kansas City, that's not the case right now. The criminals are emboldened after the last few years. So what does that do? Well, that leaves the workers and the companies in an impossible spot. Like, you cannot put your employees in positions where they are doing vigilante justice, or they're pulling out their phones and they're recording criminals and they're chasing them out of stores. You just can't have that. Because God forbid something happens to them, you've got massive lawsuits on your hands, on top of the fact that, you potentially lose an employee. So that's why this all ties back to 4 years ago. The soft on crime, the defund the police push across America that has vastly impacted, I will add, urban areas much more than suburban areas, is still playing out in a very negative way across the country. And, we shared this really good piece in the Wall Street Journal from, it was earlier in the week, that showed crime is down or even in some parts of the country. In suburban areas and rural areas, it's basically unchanged from 2019 to 2023. But when you look at the urban areas in America, those are the areas where violent crime is up and property crime is up. Violent crime, and this comes, by the way, from the National Crime Victimization Survey. Urban property crime is up 26% from 2019 to 2023. Violent crime rates in urban parts of the country, up 40% from 2019 to 2023. In suburban areas, it's basically even. In 2019, there were 22 violent victimizations per 1,000 people. In 2023, it was 23 per 1,000. That is statistically insignificant. In rural areas, it actually went down from 16.3 per 1,000 persons in 2019 to 15.3 in 2023. Again, not statistically significant in any kind of change. Our recent crime spike in America is limited to cities. It's why yesterday I was on Kansas City Week in Review. We recorded that on Kansas City PBS. That'll air tonight at 7 o'clock on Kansas City PBS, and then again on Sunday morning at 11:30. And Nick Haynes does an awesome job with that show. He keeps it moving. He is an outstanding moderator. He does not have a political bias. He is actually old school, right down the middle. And he asked me, I mean, it was a fine question to ask, but it was ridiculous in terms of what the topic was. And the topic was Jean Peters Baker, the Jackson County prosecutor, going on one of the local TV stations and claiming that the reason that she doesn't prosecute enough criminals is because KCPD does not send her enough cases. Can you believe that? If you are somebody who has worked in law enforcement or you work in law enforcement and you want to use a different name and change your voice, please trust me. The audience wants to hear from you. I talk to a lot of these folks off the record, but if you have the backbone to call in right now, we'd love to hear from you on this. The accusation was that Jean Peters Baker doesn't get enough cases to her desk from the Kansas City, Missouri Police Department, and that's why she doesn't prosecute enough criminals. And I said to Nick Haynes, and I hope this makes the show tonight, that is the stupidest thing I've ever heard. Do you really think the cops in this town who arrest the same criminals day after day, week after week, month after month, want to continue to put themselves at risk, want to continue to risk their own lives by not sending cases to the prosecutor's office? Do you really think that's the case? You would have to be a fool to believe that narrative from the Jackson County prosecutor, that somehow the real problem is the cops don't do their jobs to send the cases to her office. Yes, because the cops love arresting the same guys and the same groups over and over again. They love risking their lives more frequently than they have to. They love doing that. Said nobody ever. Use some common sense. And I'm not saying that to Nick or you. I'm saying that to Jean Peters Baker and anybody who thinks about this story. That is the most nonsensical argument I've ever heard, John.
Yeah, in this consumer society, what are the cops supposed to do? You arrest the guy, you say, we got this guy doing this, you need to charge him with X, Y, and Z. No, it doesn't come that way.
Yeah.
Right? You got the guy, the office determines what charges.
That's how it goes.
Right.
Here's what we busted this person with, and you guys do your job from here.
Right. That's where it ends.
That's how it goes.
Cops don't turn in it with charges attached.
Cops are reactive. That's what they do. And after they arrest somebody, the legal system is basically out of their hands. 913-408-7957. 913-408-7957. We got some good texts rolling in here on KCMO Talk Radio. We've got you as well we're going to get to. And we have our buddy Kendall Gammon just after 7 o'clock, followed by Steve Moore at 7:35. Pete Mundo on a Red Friday on KCMO 95.7 FM. 6:50 on a Red Friday. Thanks for being here on KCMO. Kendall Gammon will preview Chiefs-Chargers coming up in 15 minutes. Do not miss that. There is a lot of pressure building with under 40 days to go until the election on certain individuals to come out and endorse Kamala Harris. And I don't mean celebrities. I mean Republican politicians. And one of those is Mitt Romney. Big piece in the Washington Post that dropped this morning. Why Mitt Romney is resisting pressure to endorse Kamala Harris. So here's how this is going to go the next 40 days. They are going to try to bully people like Mitt Romney to come out and endorse Kamala Harris. Now, I don't think it's going to matter. Like Mitt Romney's, who is waiting on Mitt Romney's endorsement? I don't think Mitt Romney's wife is waiting on Mitt Romney's endorsement. These endorsements get so overblown in especially national politics. The only place where I think endorsements actually matter is if you're talking about very local politics like school board races. And if you have a prominent statewide politician come out and endorse you, a governor in a school board race, like that's kind of a big deal. But in the presidential race, I mean, we saw the numbers that came out from Quinnipiac. We shared those with you earlier in the week. Taylor Swift doesn't move the needle, John.
It becomes a style over substance, right?
Exactly. Mm-hmm. It does.
It's just for the appearance. It's not for the actual impact.
It's not. Because there just is no impact. It's a 50-50 country right now. There's a sliver of undecideds. And no one's like, I was kind of on the fence. I'm still on the fence. But, old Mitt Romney came out with the binders full of women and putting the dog on the roof. Some of those 2012 allegations, if you remember them. And I was waiting on old Mitt to tell me what to do. So here we go. All right, Mitt, thank you very much. But this is also just about bullying from the media. The Washington Post writes, as Election Day nears and a parade of anti-Trump Republicans announce their support for VP Kamala Harris, one prominent GOP Trump critic has withheld his endorsement, Mitt Romney of Utah, one of the rare anti-Trump Republicans who still holds elected office. A couple of paragraphs later, the Washington Post writes something that is very smart to write. Romney has questioned the value and impact of his endorsement. All right, so Mitt hasn't totally lost his brain. Good, I'm glad. And expressed a desire to preserve his ability to rebuild the Republican Party in a post-Trump world, said three people familiar with those conversations and his thinking, who spoke on the condition of anonymity to discuss private deliberations. So Mitt Romney, to his credit, is smart to think that. If Mitt Romney comes out and endorses Kamala Harris, it doesn't actually move the needle. All it does is give MSNBC and CNN an opportunity to run a headline and do a segment on another Republican turns on Trump. And they get to feed that narrative to their own base while no votes get moved in the process. And then what happens is that if Donald Trump does not win, and if there is a reckoning within the Republican Party where maybe people look in the mirror and they say, okay, what's the best way forward? Mitt Romney is not a credible person to be in that conversation because he endorsed Kamala Harris, who is the most progressive candidate in modern American history to run for the White House. So you couldn't take Mitt Romney seriously at that point, you see? If he was actually serious, and apparently he somewhat is, about remaking the Republican Party in a post-Donald Trump world, well, he's better off just keeping his mouth shut. He can say, hey, I'm not voting for either of these people. That's his prerogative. He's allowed to do that. But you can't endorse Kamala Harris and then come back, whether it's months or years down the road, and be like, this is what the Republican Party should do. No, you will have lost all credibility. And even Mitt Romney apparently understands that. So as much as Mitt's gone off the deep end here a little bit, I give him credit for coming to that obvious conclusion. His endorsement is not going to move the needle like he thinks it is, or like some people around him think that it might. And if he truly wants to be part of what he perceives to be, I'm not saying he's right with this, but with what he perceives to be the best way forward for the party itself, you can't endorse Kamala Harris. You will have no credibility. Now, next Tuesday is the vice presidential debate, and we are going to have that here at 8 p.m. on KCMO Talk Radio. We have our Politics in a Pint at 6 p.m. on Tuesday night. We will have you home on the couch for the VP debate. So come out at 6. We'll be at American Legion Post 370 with Dr. Prasanth Reddy running against Sharice Davids and Johnson County Sheriff candidate Doug Bedford. They're going to be out with us that night. Come out, hang out, have a beer. You just have to RSVP right now at kcmotalkradio.com. We do have a few spots left, so make sure you are RSVP'd. You got to be on the list. It's free to come. We just ask you to support, buy some food, have a drink, and we'll be out there. I'll be out there having a good time. We'll do a little Q&A with the candidates, and you get to ask some questions. You get to meet them. Obviously, I'll be there, and it's going to be a great time. But you got to RSVP at kcmotalkradio.com. So the VP debate is Tuesday night, and this is not a surprise that things like this are also leaking this morning. J.D. Vance, in 2020 messages, said Trump thoroughly failed to deliver. This comes from the Washington Post, and it is direct messages that J.D. Vance sent to somebody. We don't know who, because they're protecting this person. But according to these direct messages sent during Trump's final year in office over Twitter, now X, J.D. Vance harshly criticized his future running mate's record of governance and said Trump had not fulfilled his economic agenda. J.D. Vance writing in February of 2020, Trump has just so thoroughly failed to deliver on his economic populism, accepting a disjointed China policy. That's one of the direct messages J.D. Vance is alleged to have written in February of 2020. What is this really about? This is about getting under Donald Trump's skin. Did J.D. Vance say that? Maybe. I mean, Trump was not nearly as populist in office as he was on the campaign trail. And frankly, I think that's a good thing. He was much more of a supply side economics guy, and it actually worked out pretty damn well for the country over the economic populism. He weaved in the populism. I thought it was a good balance. But if you're like a true populist, Trump was probably not populist enough for you when he was in office. But this is really about trying to divide J.D. Vance and also get under his skin ahead of Tuesday night. But that Tuesday night debate might actually mean more than we thought, because Trump and Kamala are not going to debate again. So that's what makes this VP debate that much more interesting, and it will air right here Tuesday night at 8 p.m. So Mark Cuban is living proof that even idiots can become billionaires. It's truly an amazing concept. A guy who I always had, some respect for has totally lost his mind. Mark Cuban goes on CNBC yesterday. Really interesting sit-down interview. I give him credit for doing it, and he mixes it up with the one guy on that morning show at CNBC, Squawk Box, who was right of center, and that would be Joe Kernan. But Mark Cuban made one of the most outlandish claims that you just have to sit back and laugh when you hear somebody say something like this, and they try to say it with a straight face.
What's the most watched news channel? Who are the most watched and viewed and listened to podcasts? Who are the most watched and listened to or
Is it
viewed?
Fox?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right?
Okay.
I mean, it's not close, right? The number one shows are all Fox. The number one podcast,
So
lean right.
Even in spite of that, she's been able to...
Not in spite of that, in spite of that, meaning the mainstream media is not who you think it is. The mainstream media truly leans right.
Maybe.
The mainstream media leans right, says Mark Cuban.
He's a cuckoo bird.
You have got to be kidding me. And the reason that he says the mainstream media leans right is because some of the top shows on TV and on podcasts, and I would say on radio here in Kansas City, lean the other way, lean to the right. Therefore, that's the mainstream. No, you know what that means, Mark Cuban? What that means is that the people are wising up, and the people are finding the content that they want to consume that is not left-wing propaganda. And now, because of the social media world that we have and the fact that we have more options, it's not just the old days of, well, ABC, CBS, or NBC. The whole notion of I've only got the big three networks. They all basically are the same. I got to pick one. Because we now have more options than ever before, the American people can decide what kind of content they want to consume. But that has nothing to do with the leanings of our mainstream media. And the data backs it up, by the way. Party affiliation when it comes to journalists. Back in 1971, and I'm looking at this data right in front of me, 36% of journalists were Democrats. 26% were Republicans. 33% were independent. That's 1971. Fast forward to 2022, the most recent time this poll was done. 36% of journalists are now self-proclaimed Democrats. 52% are independents, or so they call themselves. Republicans, 3.4%. 3.4% of your journalists in this country are self-proclaimed Republicans. That's the data, Mark Cuban. The fact that the American people are finding shows on Fox, they're finding podcasts like, Ben Shapiro and Bongino and some of the shows that you hear on KCMO, the fact that they are at the top of the charts tells you just that the American people are cutting through the BS. And they're finding content that they actually want to find, and they're not just blindly following what the mainstream media is selling them. Right? I mean, this show has been kicking butt, especially since our flip over to 95.7 FM. Do I sit here and say, we're now mainstream? No. We still tell a completely different story, and I would argue the real story of what's happening here in Kansas City in a way that KCUR and, the boring news wheel that airs on KMBZ does not want to do. And by the way, you get to interact with us in a way that they don't do either. So we're just having the conversation of Kansas City. Does that mean we're suddenly mainstream? No, not at all. And for Mark Cuban to make a statement like that, man, it just goes to show you too can grow up and become a billionaire. When's the last time you actually watched SportsCenter? And I say that as somebody who grew up eating Cheerios, watching SportsCenter every single day. And now I sit here still as a sports fan, but I say to myself, the show has become so irrelevant because I don't need to sit there on television to watch the top 10 plays anymore. I can get it on my phone. I can find the highlights that I want. I don't need the show anymore. I mean, I used to love the show, but my goodness, it got so outdated. And I thought of this last night because I saw that Linda Cohn, who's been at ESPN and been with SportsCenter for 32 years. I mean, Mark and I grew up on Linda Cohn's SportsCenter, and she's not leaving on a full-time basis, but she's taken a new gig doing some radio up in Seattle for the NHL franchise. You're a franchise, Mark, the Kraken. Aren't you a big Kraken guy?
That's right. I'm going to have to listen to some Linda Cohn.
Yeah, and you can rock your Kraken jersey here one day next week in honor of Linda Cohn. So she's going up to do some radio, which I respect. I mean, that's cool. You got big-time stars at ESPN cutting back a little bit, doing some radio. How often do you hear that? But I thought to myself, man, that show has fallen so far that even Linda Cohn is like, yeah, time to look for something new, John.
Yeah, I was thinking of how far things have come even, in my lifetime within yours. And the thing that occurs to me was a funny line. I think it's in Breakfast Club. It's Anthony Michael Hall. And anyway, he's worried about something getting – because no way, dude, that'll get duped and end up on cable. Right? Like that was the biggest fear of penetration back in the 80s. Getting on cable.
Yeah.
To your point, you just pick up the phone.
Yeah.
What are the Royals doing right now? Oh, it's 1 out and 3-2 count.
Yeah, I don't have to watch the scroll on the bottom of ESPN and be like, come on, Royals. Oh, I know I missed it. I got to keep watching the scroll, right?
But SportsCenter very much a thing of its time in its place when it came out with Tom Mees and Chris Berman, right?
Yeah, and then you go through the years of
maybe the pinnacle, actually, once you see how things panned out.
I would say the pinnacle was The Big Show. Dan Patrick, Keith Olbermann. Before Keith Olbermann became an absolute wacko, lunatic, left-wing maniac.
Weird. He's weird.
Yeah, he's the definition of Tim Walz is weird.
Yeah.
That was, I mean, at least in my memory, that was the pinnacle of SportsCenter.
So I'm a little before you, and so for late-night TV, you would get the wisecracking sports things. These guys are funny.
Yes.
And come up with little slogans and phrases and things like that. So it was up against, Letterman and Carson and things like that at one point.
If you
for late night TV watchers.
If you are a fan of SportsCenter, or were a fan, no one really is anymore. The book ESPN's "Those Guys Have All the Fun" that chronicles the history of ESPN, late 70s into the early 80s, and kind of the rogue operation that it was and how it came and became ESPN is actually a great story. And it's a long book. It's like 800 pages. But if you got the time, I read it before kids, just so you kind of have an idea of, I couldn't read that today. But it's an absolutely outstanding read.
Stuart Scott was always one of my favorites.
Yes, Stuart Scott in the early days as well was outstanding. Rest in peace. So you go through that, I think, mid-90s era of Olbermann, Patrick, Stuart Scott. I'm forgetting a couple of guys that aren't coming to mind right now. Trey Wingo was there, during that run as well. He was actually on the show last week. So to think of how far SportsCenter has fallen is kind of sad, but guess what? Time moves on.
I don't know if it's fallen, but certainly if you don't change or adapt, you get left behind for sure.
And they tried to turn it into a studio show, and that was stupid because they made it a left-wing studio show with Jamel Hill. Remember that debacle? Right. They called it SC6. They put it on at 6 p.m. Eastern. It became more of a studio show than a highlight show, but it was just left-wing politics.
Well, and it's like mainstream TV. You had cable, so you could push the envelope a little further out to sea on cable.
Yeah.
And then once the internet came out, there is no sea. It's a huge ocean. There are no limits. There are no boundaries, standards.
And you can find what you need and what you want.
You can find and several versions of it.
Exactly. Exactly right. Now, speaking of ESPN and left-wing politics, here's the dumbest guy of the day. This is David Dennis Jr. I don't know him because, like I said, my ESPN watching is just not what it used to be. I still love live sports, but I don't need to get the analysis from some wannabe Jamel Hill on ESPN anymore. So David Dennis Jr. is very happy that Caitlin Clark is no longer in the WNBA playoffs. She got knocked out on Wednesday. The Indiana Fever season is over. And Davis Dennis Jr. writes here, I hope the people who say they are staying away from the WNBA now that Caitlin Clark is gone actually keep their promise. These are about to be all-time series, and their toxicity is not needed. Let us enjoy things. I mean, boy, are you trying too hard there, David. But I bring this up because the guy's an ESPN employee. ESPN owns the WNBA games. And this season, Caitlin Clark games are averaging 1.18 million viewers per game. Games without Caitlin Clark average 394,000. So that's a bold play, Cotton, as they say. ESPN man says he wants lower ratings for his own company. Wow. That guy's a real genius. Real smart guy there. Jeez. Even Joe Biden's like, whoa, buddy, come on now.
Come on, man.
What are you doing here? That's a bad play. But that's what you get. When you put your politics ahead of common sense, those are the kind of commentators and analysis you end up with. And also why ESPN is a shell of what it used to be.